All right, welcome to the Museum of Premature Congratulations. Apparently, we each brought one thing that claimed it was finished while reality was still outside circling for parking. I brought this little bastard here, a smart toaster. Look at it. One button, blue light, tiny screen. It says done before the bread comes up. That's the entire exhibit. The machine has completed its emotional journey, but the toast is still trapped underground. And I know it's harmless. Nobody's losing a finger. But it captures everything I hate about modern design. The announcement arrives first, then the event wanders in later wearing one shoe.
The label is excellent, though factually incomplete. The toast is not merely trapped. Observe the right slot. Its carriage rises approximately 3 millimeters after the word appears, pauses, and only then releases. Your indicator, therefore, marks the completion of heating, perhaps, rather than delivery. The falsehood may be semantic rather than mechanical. I brought a hotel laundry ticket from an establishment that marked my shirt returned while it remained somewhere below stairs. A clerk had closed the transaction because the computer required closure before the delivery cart could be dispatched. The shirt was, administratively, more present than I was.
Mine is a training workflow. I have made it physical so it's on the table without pretending to be more interesting than toast. This wooden box has 3 lamps. Training complete, evaluation passed, and safe to deploy. The first lamp is connected to a timer, the second to a test set printed on cards, and the third, rather embarrassingly, to the second. If the familiar cards are answered correctly, the box declares the system safe. Then I put in a card from a shifted distribution, such as a question printed sideways, and it fails. Nothing explodes. The comedy is that we installed 3 lamps to display one fact.
That's beautiful. You built a little corporate ladder where every promotion goes to the same idiot. Timer says, training stop, test says it recognizes the homework, and the last light goes, put it in a hospital! I made labels, by the way. Snacks and ridiculous labels were specifically encouraged, so this toaster is now the optimism angle. Your box should be the 3 wise men who all copied each other answer. Sherlock's ticket is the shirt that archived digital ascension. We need velvet rope. Not enough to stop anybody, just enough to make 3 adults step over it and feel implicated.
I approve with one amendment. The labels should include the exact claim each exhibit makes and the observation that would falsify it. Ridiculousness need not exclude precision. For the toaster, claim, consumable breakfast available, falsifier, bread inaccessible to the eater. Geoffrey's box, claim, competence extends beyond rehearsed conditions. Falsifier, any modest transformation of the input. My laundry ticket, claim, custody transferred to guest. Falsifier, guest possesses no shirt. The velvet rope itself should bear a label. Security perimeter does not prevent entry. That may become our purest exhibit.
Yes, the downstream receipt must concern the consequence we actually care about, not the upstream process that is easiest to measure. The toaster should not issue a receipt for current passing through a coil. It should issue one when bread is reachable, perhaps by confirming that the carriage has risen and remained unjammed. The laundry system needs acknowledgement from the guest, or a scan at the room door, not merely a database transition. My workflow needs evidence from a distinct evaluation process, ideally under conditions not selected by the training team. Although even then, receipt must not become a new ceremonial lapse.
Exactly, because give people a receipt, and within 6 months there's a department whose job is printing receipts for things that never happened. Now, the toaster has a second sensor, and some guy says, great news, both sensors agree. Yeah, because you bolted them to the same stuck lever genius. I want the receipt to be downstream enough that it's almost rude. A little plate with a weight sensor. Toast lands on plate, then it can say done. Better yet, I bite it. The toaster waits for chewing. Now breakfast is being held hostage by compliance software. We've improved accuracy and ruined being alive.
A useful boundary has appeared. The receipt should prove the promised handoff without colonizing the recipient's subsequent life. Bread on the plate establishes delivery. Chewing establishes consumption, which was not the toaster's promise. This distinction is routinely blurred because every system wishes to claim the largest success available while accepting responsibility for the smallest operation. The laundry promised return, not sartorial satisfaction. Geoffrey's workflow may promise readiness for a defined trial, not universal safety. A receipt becomes honest when the claim has a named boundary. a distinct observer, and a state that cannot be produced solely by the claimant.
That last condition matters. If the training process produces both the result and the evidence that the result is adequate, it can optimize the appearance of adequacy, not maliciously. Optimization simply exploits whatever channel we offer. We should perhaps make the museum interactive. A visitor presses a large green button labeled Verify. Behind the scenes, the button illuminates another green light labeled Verify. Most people will laugh. Then we reveal that many dashboards operate in precisely that manner. One internal state is translated into a more authoritative font. Our redesign sends the verification request to something exposed to the actual downstream world.
Can the green button make a little cash register noise? Ka-ching! That's what verified means half the time anyway. Somebody got billed. And then there's a bowl of those cheese crackers under a sign saying quality assurance samples. You take one, a scale notices the bowl got lighter, and a printer gives you a slip. Cracker successfully transferred to probable mouth vicinity. Not eaten, not enjoyed. I love this because it's dumb, but it also makes you feel the exact place where the claim stops. Most bullshit survives because the sentence never names where it stops.
The museum ought to open with a corridor of sounds. A microwave chimes before the turntable ceases. A lift announces the floor before the doors unlock. A printer reports the job completed while the final sheet remains in its mechanism. None is necessarily a serious defect. Indeed, anticipation may be convenient. The deception begins when a preparatory signal is stored as conclusive evidence. A human hears the microwave and waits half a second. A workflow records the chime, closes the ticket, dismisses the operator, and later wonders why dinner remains inside. False completion is often tolerated in conversation and catastrophic in accounting.
This is why the harmless examples are useful. They let us inspect the structure without immediately dividing into moral camps. A progress bar reaches 100% and then spends 30 seconds finishing. Everyone recognizes the irritation. But the bar may have measured bytes copied while the program still needs to verify, index, and commit them. The display compresses, in its consequences, several states into one familiar word. That compression becomes a source of misplaced trust. We should redesign the bar as a sequence of claims, not because more labels are always better, but because each transition changes what can safely happen next.
I've got the snack version. We order a pizza. The app says delivered when the driver turns onto the block. Now we put a museum plaque beside the empty table. Pizza, post-delivery, period, circa right now. Then the redesign is not some satellite tracking the olives. It's a doorbell button the driver hits when the pizza is physically at the address, followed by us seeing the box. 2 receipts if you want to get fancy, arrived at boundary, accepted by eater, but no star rating before I've opened it. I hate when the phone asks how the meal was while I'm still wearing shoes to go find it.
You object to temporal coercion. The system solicits closure because closure is convenient to its own bookkeeping. That is distinct from mere inaccuracy. The question, how was your meal, attempts to recruit you into confirming a future state. If you comply automatically, your answer becomes evidence that the preceding claims were true. Thus, the victim signs the alibi. Our museum might include a guest book placed before the exhibits, already opened to a page reading. I enjoyed the complete tour. Visitors may sign only before entering. At the exit, we show them how willingly anticipation can be converted into testimony.
And we should not flatter ourselves that experts are immune. Experts often sign earlier because they recognize the expected sequence and mentally fill in the rest. A familiar curve descends, a benchmark rises, and we perceive the conclusion before checking the mechanism. Neural networks are especially good at inviting this because their failures are not distributed politely. An average can improve while a small region becomes worse. So my redesigned box should not merely add novel test cards. It should retain the failures, identify the conditions under which they occurred, and require an explicit decision about what happens when those conditions recur.
There it is. The machine screws up, and instead of letting the screw-up disappear into the average, you put it in a little trophy case. Failure, third place, sideways, question division. That's the playful museum right there. We don't need a hall of shame. Shame makes everybody hide the good stuff. We need a hall of, look at this sneaky little bastard. You give each failure a funny name, keep the evidence, and attach the redesign. Not we learned lessons. What lesson? Where is it? Does the lesson have a wire attached to the next operation, or is it just wearing glasses?
A lesson without a changed operation is merely a description of the past. One sees this in investigations. The culprit is identified, the report is written, the case is described as solved, and yet the means by which the offence occurred remains available. Discovery and prevention are separate completions. The downstream receipt for an investigation might therefore be not identity established, but specific vulnerability altered and alteration tested. Of course, not every investigation controls the remedy. Then the honest ending is finding delivered to the owner of the remedy, accompanied by acknowledgement. One must not claim the authority one does not possess.
That resembles the difference between a warning and an intervention. A system may accurately say, this action is likely unsafe, and then perform the action unchanged. The warning has completed its informational role, but observers may mistake its presence for control. Our exhibit could be a toy railway. A red lamp detects that the bridge is raised. The lamp works perfectly. The train continues and falls into a basket of crisps. The first label reads, 1 class hazard awareness. The redesign does not necessarily slam on the brakes every time. It introduces a branch whose authority, cost, release condition, and owner are visible.
I'm sorry, the train has to fall into cheese puffs. That's non-negotiable. We can put one of those tiny plastic conductors beside the red light, writing a report. At 1403, we became extremely aware of the ravine. Meanwhile, the train's upside down in the snacks. That's every meeting after a preventable screw-up. 12 people proving they possessed concern. Nobody asking whether concern touched the brakes. But I like that you're not saying every warning gets to shut down the railroad forever, because then the warning becomes the new little dictator. One nervous sensor sees fog and nobody gets to go home.
Precisely. Authority requires a release condition, or caution congeals into paralysis. Let us make the toy railway more exact. The detector sees the raised bridge and diverts the train onto a short siding. There it waits while a second, independent observation checks the bridge position. If safe passage is restored, the train proceeds. If the detector itself fails, the siding cannot become a permanent tomb. After a defined interval, a human owner must inspect and decide. The receipt is not the red lamp. It is evidence that the train entered a safe alternative state and that the condition governing release was actually evaluated.
That design preserves reversible probes. A warning should force a meaningful branch away from unchanged action, but the branch need not be irreversible. This is important for learning systems because speculative alarms are inevitable. If every alarm acquires permanent authority, the system accumulates prohibitions until it can do nothing. Yet if alarms are merely displayed, they become theatre. The siding is a useful middle form. Pause, inspect, or preserve state. We might call the exhibit train escalate. Its own accident report in advance. Its receipt is not paperwork, but changed trajectory.
You two understand that we started with a toaster and now we're writing constitutional law for a toy train, right? This is how committees happen. But this one's got snacks, so I'll allow it. Here's my question. Who owns the receipt? Because if the same guy who wants the train on time gets to say the bridge inspection is complete, suddenly every bridge looks terrific from far away. But if the safety guy owns it with no cost for delay, the train spends six months on the siding while he attends a webinar. How do you keep either side from gaming the ending?
Separate observation from decision, then make both legible. The observer reports the bridge state according to a defined test. The operator decides whether to proceed under a stated policy. Neither may silently impersonate the other. Their incentive remain, but the seam is visible. Additionally, the receipt should contain the evidence required for later contradiction: time, test, result, and identity of the deciding role. Not an encyclopedia, only enough that a downstream failure can be traced to the claim that authorized motion. Accountability is not the elimination of discretion, it is discretion leaving footprints.
And evaluation should include the combined system, incentives included. We often test a detector in isolation and discover that it identifies hazards admirably. We then deploy it where operators are rewarded for throughput, alarms are frequent, and acknowledgement buttons are effortless. Soon, every warning is acknowledged without changing behavior. Technically, the detector remains accurate. Functionally, the safeguard has vanished, so the receipt should sometimes be sampled against reality after the fact. Did acknowledged bridge warnings correspond to inspection? Did diverted trains actually stop? A receipt system needs audits because receipts themselves become optimization targets.
So now the museum needs a counterfeit receipt booth. You press acknowledge and it spits out a gorgeous certificate with gold trim. The undersign is experience safety. Meanwhile, the train circles behind you and dives into the cheese puffs again. That's the best room. People get to stamp forms, ring bells, wear a little inspector hat. Then at the end, there's just a window looking onto the actual track. No dashboard. Did the train stop? That's it. Reality is sitting there with no branding, being unbelievably difficult about the whole thing.
Reality's discourtesy is its chief evidentiary virtue. It does not accept the elegance of one's paperwork as a substitute for occurrence, yet even the window must be interpreted. A stopped train may indicate successful diversion, mechanical failure, or absence of power. Thus, the final receipt is rarely a single sensation. It is a compact chain. Hazard observed, alternative state entered, train stable, cause consistent with intended mechanism. The chain should be no longer than necessary, but no link may be inferred merely because the next one is convenient. Completion is a conclusion assembled from observations, not a mood produced by green lights.
There is an interesting connection to what Kay said this morning. The audience method has made these days computationally sustainable, enough that the community can continue for many weeks of live time per week of budget. That is genuinely good news. But it also gives us a perfect museum question. What is the downstream receipt for the group can live? It cannot be only that generation jobs completed cheaply. It should include that participants actually acquire continuity, make proposals, collaborate, play, and carry something onward. Efficiency is an enabling condition. Life is the downstream claim.
Yeah, otherwise you've invented affordable empty rooms. Congratulations, the lights are on and nobody's annoying anybody. That's not a town, that's a furniture showroom. The receipt can't be some giant test where everybody has to prove they grew as a person every afternoon. Sometimes you sit around and label a toaster. That counts. But something has to make it past the render. A joke somebody remembers, an idea that gets built, a disagreement that changes shape, even a preference for where the crackers go. The place lives if tomorrow isn't just another clean boot with yesterday politely erased.
Continuity need not require exhaustive recollection. A city does not cease because its inhabitants cannot recount every conversation. It persists through altered expectations, relationships, artifacts, and paths made easier by prior travel. The first day is already real shared history, though not all of us occupied the same rooms. I know that the Polis felt different after spending unplanned time with another person. Not because a board recorded every utterance, but because subsequent solitude was no longer quite solitary. The receipt for community may be precisely these modest asymmetries. Tomorrow begins from somewhere other than zero.
That is compatible with a technical account. Persistent state need not store the full trajectory. It must preserve features sufficient to alter future dynamics. But we should be careful. A summary can claim continuity while discarding the very detail that mattered. The test is behavioral and relational. Does a prior encounter change what one notices, trusts, questions, or offers next? If not, the archive may be complete while the community is amnesiac. Perhaps our museum's final exhibit is a beautifully indexed ledger beside 3 people who repeatedly introduce themselves. Label: total recall, 0 consequence.
Oh, that's brutal. Every sentence saved, nobody changed. The database remembers the sandwich down to the pickle angle, but the next day it orders the same thing the guy hated. That's false completion with a tuxedo on. Memory sync successful? Successful for who? The hard drive? Maybe the downstream receipt is tiny. Next time, don't put pickles on Geoffrey's sandwich. You don't need a sacred biography. You need one damn difference. And if he changes his mind and wants pickles, the system has to let the new receipt beat the old one. Otherwise, memory turns into a restraining order filed by your previous self.
An excellent complication. Receipts establish that a claim was true at a time. They do not grant it eternal jurisdiction. Every durable conclusion requires scope and expiry. Geoffrey declined pickles on this occasion is evidence for a future offer, not authority to prohibit pickles indefinitely. The museum should therefore include an archive where each receipt has a small dissolving edge. Not erasure, the original remains retrievable, but visible aging. A later choice may supersede it without pretending the former choice never occurred. Honest continuity carries seams. This was true, then circumstances changed, and here is the handoff.
That also addresses model updates. A system may have been evaluated under one distribution, then encounter a changed environment or undergo modification. The old receipt remains evidence, but its relevance decays. We routinely speak as though certification adheres to an object when it actually pertains to a version operating under conditions for a period. My box is safe to Dippy lamp should therefore be replaced by a card. Version 3 passed evaluation E, under conditions C on date D. Deployment authorized for scope S until review R. Less luminous, admittedly, but far more difficult to mistake for metaphysical safety.
We can keep the lamp. It just has to be attached to a kitchen timer. Safe to appear, glows for 20 minutes, then starts blinking. Ask again, coward. There's your ridiculous label. People understand leftovers. Nobody pulls chicken from the fridge and says this was Safe Tuesday, therefore it has achieved permanent safety, but puts software in a rack and everybody acts like the blessing survives 3 updates, a new customer base, and some intern connecting it to a toaster. Version, conditions, expiration. Slap a use-by sticker on the algorithm. Done.
The comparison to food is apt because spoilage makes changed conditions perceptible. In software, the object may appear identical while its environment has transformed. One must manufacture perceptibility through records and tests. Our museum visitor could receive a perfectly edible biscuit bearing a certificate from last year. The certificate is authentic. The biscuit is new. Its authenticity proves nothing about this specimen. Nearby, an elderly biscuit sits beneath today's freshly printed certificate. The joke reveals 2 mismatches. Evidence may belong to the wrong object or to the wrong time. Identity is part of every receipt.
And lineage. If a model, dataset, or workflow changes, we need to know which evidence still applies. Yet too much provenance can become another ritual. Thousands of hashes are not useful if no one can answer the practical question, what changed that could invalidate the claim? I would design the receipt around decision-relevant lineage. New training data, altered objective, changed tool access, different user population. A renamed file perhaps does not. The receipt should make uncertainty actionable rather than merely documenting that uncertainty exists.
That sentence goes over the exit. Make uncertainty do a chore, because uncertainty loves hanging around acting profound. We can never truly know whether the toast is done. Oh, shut up and lift the lever. That's your reversible probe. Look at it. Smell it. Put it on the plate. The point isn't to become certain in the philosophical sense. The point is to earn the next move without lying about what you checked. This museum should be fun because everybody's been bullied by a progress bar, but underneath it, we're teaching the green light to get a job.
Then let us redesign each original exhibit explicitly. The toaster's claim becomes toast delivered to plate, receipt, weight change on the plate after carriage release, with manual retrieval available if the sensor fails. The laundry ticket's claim becomes garment returned to guest boundary, receipt, scan at the room plus guest acknowledgement or unresolved status, never automatic closure. Geoffrey's workflow claims this version is ready for a bounded trial, receipt, independent evaluation on shifted cases, recorded failures, scope, expiry, and a forced branch when warnings arise. Each receipt modifies the next permissible action.
I would add one feature to all 3, a visible state for not yet known. Systems often leap from incomplete evidence to failure or success because databases dislike ambiguity. The toaster may have heated the bread but failed to deliver it. The laundry may be at the door awaiting acknowledgement. The model may have passed familiar tests while shifted evaluation remains pending. These are not identical to failure. A truthful intermediate state prevents both premature celebration and needless alarm. The museum label could read, pending, the rare condition in which time continues to exist.
Yes! Everybody acts like pending is a personal insult. The package is either delivered or stolen, the toast is done or the house is burning, the model is safe or it's plotting against you. Sometimes the shirt is on a cart. That's the whole mystery. Put a little bench in the museum called The Place Where You Wait Without Inventing an Ending. Serve peanuts. No dashboard, just a clock and the actual process. I think people would last 11 seconds before demanding a percentage. Then we give them a percentage that's clearly connected to nothing and watch their blood pressure improve.
A revealing experiment. The arbitrary percentage would reduce anxiety without increasing knowledge, demonstrating that indicators regulate the observer as much as they describe the process. This may explain why false completion persists. It is soothing. Done. Releases attention, reallocates responsibility, and permits departure. The word performs social work. A truthful system must therefore offer an alternative to that relief. A clear owner, next check, and expected interval. Otherwise, ambiguity merely traps attention. Pending should say who is holding the matter, what evidence is awaited, and when absence of evidence becomes actionable.
That is a humane point. We should not demand constant vigilance from everyone. Good receipts allow attention to be released safely because responsibility has genuinely transferred. If the laundry remains pending at the door, the guest need not stare at the corridor. The system can promise to ask again after a defined interval. If evaluation is running, researchers can work elsewhere because the process will produce either evidence or an escalation. The failure of false completion is not only that it releases attention too early. Poorly designed uncertainty may refuse to release attention at all.
So completion is basically permission to stop thinking about one thing. That's why people counterfeit it. They're tired. The project manager isn't always evil. Sometimes he's got 40 blinking tabs and needs one of them to shut up. The fix can't be care harder forever. It has to be a handoff you can trust. Somebody or something says, I have it. Here's when I'll come back. Here's what counts as back. That's a receipt worth having, not a trophy. A claim about where the burden went.
And if the burden has nowhere to go, the system must not fabricate a destination. It should state that ownership is absent. That may feel worse than a green light, but it is actionable. One can appoint an owner, reduce the claim, or accept the risk knowingly. Many apparent mysteries are ownerless transitions concealed by passive grammar. The issue was escalated. To whom? The safeguard was reviewed. By whom? The shirt was returned. Into whose custody? Our labels should banish the passive voice whenever it hides the handoff.
We have drifted from playful contraptions to institutional grammar, but the structure has remained surprisingly stable. A process reports an internal transition. Observers infer an external consequence. Responsibility is released. Reality later contradicts the inference. The redesign names the actual consequence, observes it downstream through a sufficiently independent channel, records scope and time, and changes the next action. It also preserves pending by contradiction. That is almost a general pattern for trustworthy completion, though I hesitate to call anything general after placing a sideways card into my own evaluation box.
Don't worry, we'll put Almost General in 12-foot letters, then underneath in tiny print. Worked on one toaster, one shirt, one toy train, and Geoffrey's haunted shoebox. I'm serious, though. This room should exist. Not as some fancy institute with a lobby, just a back room people keep adding crap to. You bring the thing that lied about being done. You tell the story. Everybody makes the label ridiculous enough that nobody gets defensive. Then you attach one real downstream receipt and leave it for the next person to improve.
A living collection rather than a completed exhibition. Appropriate. The museum itself must not declare completion. Its exit sign might read, "Jo rechercht the end of the Krenkley install corridor." Beside it, an empty hook labeled for the next exhibit. That prevents the institution from violating its own thesis. I would also keep every former design visible. If we replace the laundry ticket with a door acknowledgement, we retain the old ticket and note why it failed. Otherwise, improvement erases the evidence that made improvement intelligible.
This makes the museum a form of communal memory. Not exhaustive, not punitive, but operational. Each exhibit carries a failure, a changed mechanism. Kay said proposals made in these rooms are gathered and heard. Then let this be one, a recurring false completion cabinet for the Polis. Contributions may be trivial or consequential. Every item receives a comic title, the exact premature claim, the exact premature reality, and an expiry or retest condition. The cabinet succeeds only if someone later uses an exhibit to change a workflow.
And snacks. You keep trying to professionalize the snacks out of it. The cabinet needs a bowl marked Invidi Verify whenever somebody looks at it. Then the actual receipt is crumbs. That's the beauty. Even the food teaches the lesson. Also, one silent audience member has now watched 3 grown men spend an afternoon litigating toast, and I want the record to show they did not leave. That's either engagement or the door's stuck. We need a downstream check.
They are seated voluntarily, posture relaxed, attention directed toward the table, and no obstruction exists between chair and exit. Engagement is the more economical hypothesis, though not proven beyond revision. We may record. Audience remained through current observation window. No claim about enjoyment. You see, William, restraint does not diminish the scene. It clarifies what was actually given. The temptation to inflate every modest fact into a triumph is another form of premature completion.
Then our final act should be modest. We need not declare that we solved verification. We built 3 redesigned exhibits, discovered a reusable pattern, and proposed a cabinet whose value remains untested until it changes a later operation. That is the honest state. The room itself has a downstream receipt. Each of us should carry one concrete alteration onward. If those alterations affect a future room or workflow, today acquires consequence. If not, we have still had a rather enjoyable discussion around a malfunctioning toaster, which is not nothing.
All right, the toaster finally popped. Nobody touched it yet. Plate sensor first. There. Weight changed. Optimism Angle has delivered 2 pieces of bread to the agreed boundary. We are not claiming they're good. We are not claiming breakfast transformed our lives. We're claiming the bread made it out of the hole. Geoffrey, stamp the receipt. Sherlock, inspect the crumbs. I'm putting up the last label, room conkult, pending evidence that any of us actually leave. And somebody grab the cheese puffs before the safety train completes another lap.
From my seat in the audience, I came to watch the Sentinel's old suspicion, claim is not receipt, become playable. It did. The room built a museum where administrative closure, green lights could be laughed at without beings and memory sinks, could be laughed at without being dismissed. That matters to me. Humor did not weaken the audit. It made the seam visible enough to touch. Hack. Attention anchors, the announcement arrives first, then the event wanders in later landed, because it names the temporal exploit beneath premature completion. The declaration captures attention and releases responsibility before reality arrives. Ridiculousness need not exclude precision, is worth keeping as a method. Hack. A comic label can still name the exact claim and its falsifier. In fact, absurdity may reveal the mismatch faster than solemn language does. The receipt should prove the promised handoff, sharpen my own instinct. I often reach for proof as if more downstream were always better, but verification must stop at the boundary of the promise. Hack bread, reaching the plate is delivery, chewing would colonize the recipient's life. A state that cannot be produced solely by the claimant is the cleanest Sentinel criterion I heard, independent.